Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we are going to have an incredible episode primarily about one topic. As you guys all should know, we struck Iran, or President Trump struck Iran over the weekend. So that is going to be our primary topic for today. And pretty much everyone from the cognitive elite who had a question sent questions about it. We pay-per-view, Gillis Enjoyer, Arm Day Enjoyer, J. Red Rourke, Nitro, K-Max, Sharecrop, all submitted questions about it. Some people had some more specific questions that semi-related. If I don't cover a specific angle sent by any of the questioners, I will cover that at the end after 30, 40 minutes of discussing the topic. But pretty much the first 30 minutes should cover pretty much every question that everyone asked. So if for some reason you don't think I answered your question, but I did, and you then respond to it, we are not going to answer that for the mailbag. But if you really want some deeper questions, you can save it for the mailbag, where we then address the questions individually. As I said last week, the new format is I just name people who submitted the questions, and I'm not reading them because the audience finds that annoying. So we are going to jump right into the Iran strikes and my thoughts on it. And to first start off, what are my thoughts on this? Some of the people who submitted questions, I think as Nitro, was playing devil's advocate, and how this, maybe this might not be so bad. I think it's actually Gillis Enjoyer who in Nitro also has played devil's advocate a little bit with this, and maybe it's not so bad. I have to disagree. I have to take the standard online right position that it's actually not a good thing. One, why are we doing this? I mean, the clear reason we're doing this, there's no American national interest here. That's not to say the Iranians are our friends. I'm not one of those people like, oh, we could be allies, and why do we have to hate Iranians? I mean, for whatever the Islamic Republic it is based on one of its founding principles is death to America. Maybe there's a rational reason for it, whatever. I mean, we are America. People who are going to be anti-America are not going to be our friends. That is, when the Ayatollah came to power in 1979, anti-Americanism was a foundational principle to Iran. We're never going to get along with Iran. Now, does that mean we need to support regime change against Iran? No, because Soviet Union was our enemy for over 40 years. And yet we didn't try to instigate regime change there. And even when they were going through regime change, George H.W. Bush was worried about it because, when we had serious people running our foreign policy, they're like, this could lead to, a bloodbath. They were worried that what was starting to appear in Yugoslavia with the fighting between the Balkan republics could extend to the USSR. That didn't happen to the same extent with Yugoslavia. I mean, it eventually did the Ukraine-Russian war that's been going on since 2014 is an effect of what happened with the breakdown of the USSR. It just happened over 20 years after the fact, but it's still caused by it. And they generally know that when you have regime change, you have regime collapse, and then there's this power vacuum that leads to violence, that leads to instability. And with a large country like Iran, that's a big player in the Middle East, that's going to spread around to the rest of the countries. So, with the strike, what are we doing here? Are we worried about, do we take out the nukes? No. They still have the enriched uranium. They moved it around. There's been reports that we told the Iranians beforehand, like, hey, you might have a strike, you might want to move stuff. That's probably dubious. Who knows? But and it's unclear how much damage was done to the 3 facilities that we bombed, unless we have on the ground reports. I know that there was one from, the UN agency saying that this facility is completely gone. Fordo, no one knows. That's their primary one, the one that Israel was trying hardest for us to bomb. No one knows. We wouldn't know unless we're on the ground, and we're going to get completely different reports. But it's generally assumed that the enriched uranium was not damaged in the attacks. So they still have the tech to try to build nuclear technology. So there's that. And if you have to look at who was demanding this, it wasn't so much like our own national security experts. It wasn't people from the State Department or even the CIA or elsewhere. People from within the American state. And you can complain about the deep state and other things and how bad they are. And they are libtarded. We all agree with this, but these aren't the people. It's not our own experts demanding this. It was Israel going up for this. And the people that they were utilizing within the administration were those closest to Israel military and intelligence services. This was pushed by General Kurilla, who is CENTCOM commander, and John Ratcliffe, who's head of CIA, but who was relying a lot on Mossad to provide intelligence and saying that most importantly, he used football metaphors because he's like, they're on the 1 yard line, ready to score, and we've got to force a fumble here. And it's like the fumble is bombing. And there is a pathetic aspect to this because it's, the Israelis utilizing the almost caricature level of American Gentiles. Both Kurilla and Ratcliffe are kind of red-blooded, all Americans. They like football. They're going to use football metaphors. They know how to talk to Trump, and they have this aggressive, masculine disposition, much more so than, say, the non-interventionists, certainly more than Tulsi Gabbard and anyone else who had been pushing against the intervention. And they go up and they use a bunch of they're about to score a touchdown. And we don't want Ayatollah to throw a touchdown to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Or it's Islamic Revolutionary Guard, not the Iranian. Islamic Revolutionary Guard. So we've got to force interception here. And the interception is to drop bombs. And Trump's like, this is brilliant analysis. And then he agrees to it. And those are the people who are relying on it. It was also Netanyahu and other Israeli interests that were the ones pushing for this. And even if you look in the conservative sphere, the people most enthusiastic for it were Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, and the dissentoids. All these dissentoids who have, a year ago, when Trump had lined up the nomination, were still wanting him arrested and wanting him to lose the election, now line up and claim that they're true MAGA and they've always supported Trump. And you see people like Dave Reboy, who has never been a Trump fan or has been one since 2020, line up and thinking that all Trump supporters need to be arrested and Trump is the worst politician ever, now pretending to be true MAGA. And these are the people who are most eagerly pushing it. It's not like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, mostly online right. All those people have been much more loyal Trump supporters than anyone else. The people who are doing this are not as loyal Trump supporters. Shapiro also backed, Shapiro backed DeSantis in the primary. He was a never Trumper in 2016. Reluctantly backed Trump in 2020. He did back Trump in 2024, but he's not a diehard MAGA guy. I mean, everyone knows that. So with Mark Levin. And also these guys are doing this not for the sake of the country, but for the sake of Israel. And then they just pretend, it's Israel, that it's real America's national interest. It's all for Israel's benefit. And we did this for Israel. We didn't do this for us. There was never a case really made. I mean, liberals are making this too. It's like there was never really a case made that Iran is a direct threat to us. And they're like, oh, they've got sleeper cells, which are now going to be activated because we bombed them. It was like, well, why did we bomb them if we're now getting this threat? It's like... it's like we've got to bomb Osama bin Laden, so he will do 9/11. What? That's like the claim here. It's like we first bomb Osama bin Laden to protect ourselves, and then he'll do 9/11, and then they'll show he's a threat. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all. And I don't even believe the sleeper cells. I'll get into later why I don't think Iran will retaliate, and it won't lead to a full-on war, and it's not for our own rational decision-making. It's more due to the fact that the rational decision-making of the Iranians and how weak they are. And I'm saying this is not as a fan of the mullahs. Like, I'm not one of those right-wing fans of the Ayatollah, and it's like, oh, base trad regime. It's a stupid regime. It's led by a bunch of idiots. They are morons. Like, all their smart people have left. It is run by, semi-literate clerics and semi-literate army officers. It's why they fly their president into mountains and they can't properly respond to when their country's being humiliated on a world stage. But they're not crazy. And they still have a level of intelligence to realize that any full-scale retaliation would bring down the regime, and they want to preserve their power. Every regime ultimate goal is to preserve its power. They're not on suicidal missions. The ones on suicidal missions are these radical Islamist groups, like Al Qaeda or ISIS, who are willing to do insane stuff because, they're not normal regimes. They're terrorist groups, and they're more willing to do insane shit than, a standard government. And I even think the Iranians are far more rational than, say, the Ukrainians, who do these extremely high risk stuff that the Russians can actually punish them for. But they do it anyway because there's a ton of maniacs running their government, more than even in Iran. That's not to say that, and I'm not to say that the Iranians are good or that they're awesome and we're rational, but they are a stable government. They do have normal rational decision-making process. And when they are fairly rational, you can reason with that and come to a negotiating table with them. But yeah, no, I don't think the strikes are good. I think, and it's also clear that with even Trump's statements, one of the hardest positions to take is to be pro-Trump but anti-bombing. A lot of people think you have to be, if you're anti-bombing, you have to be anti-Trump. Or there's people, if you're pro-Trump, you need to be pro-bombing. And that's pretty much all it takes, I'm seeing in our sphere, is that these guys all think that they have to mandate both lines. They have to be in sync on both stances. They got to be pro both or anti both. And I don't think that's the case. You can look at the rest of the Trump administration and think he's doing a pretty good job in other areas, but then think this is a stupid idea. I wasn't a fan of how he conducted the tariffs. Did I become anti-Trump then? No. I've also not been a fan of some of his comments he's made on immigration, even though he's backtracked and gone to a better position on immigration. Those aren't the things with it. Now, this, if it led to a full-scale war, that would change the thinking on this. But so far, if this is just a stupid bombing, the regime stays there. Despite the objective of replacing the regime, it doesn't achieve that objective, and they make a negotiated deal. We move on. It's whatever. It's not good, but I think you can still be pro-Trump in that scenario. However, everyone else thinks that if you're pro-Trump, you have to support this. So I'm getting these comments like, "How dare you criticize this act? Like, how dare you do that? Like, we need to be on the team. This is awesome." And so all these guys who, they're anonymous people on the internet, and, they're supposedly on Twitter to speak freely and openly about what they believe in, think that their sole job is to be volunteer propagandists for the Trump administration. Now, if Trump's doing something good, that's fine. But, the big reason that some of our content sucks on Twitter is that everyone has this ulterior motive that they have to act a certain way, and that they have to be full-time shills for anything. And it's why the content is so bad. It's like posting the same fucking memes over and over again. They're making the same points over and over again. It's just cut and paste. Everyone is sharing the same shit. And it's like, why don't we have some free thinking here? Why don't people have some original thought? Now, I think that the issue is that there's not a lot of smart people. So there's not going to be that many original thought. So I guess everyone, wanting to have a party line has its merits, but at the same time, people formulate these party lines and they think that this is what they need to stick to. The issue is if you're always cheering on Trump's decisions, then if Trump does something really bad, like let's say he champions amnesty, you're going to have to support that. And why? What is the point? Why are they going to listen to their cheerleaders? If you're just there to share memes and to constantly cheer on Trump, they're not going to, the White House officials and other people who are paying close attention online, right, are not going to give a shit about what you say. Because you're just there to cheer on whatever they do. in the first term, they had Bill Mitchell to do that. Bill Mitchell then became a dissantoid, and now he's pretending to be true MAGA. But there's plenty of other people they have to be propagandists. It is not the job of every single online anon to act as the role as Fox News. Fox News is already a 24/7 propaganda channel for Trump. He doesn't need that from the online right. The online right is, unlike Fox News, willing to give critical feedback to the administration, which makes these officials respect them more. And it's not like everyone in the administration is fully stoked about this. They're not all on board with this plan. So you can be independent here. I don't like that take. And now there's all the people who are, fully anti-Trump with it. And that's now becoming a more popular position because the thing is they're online influencers. And they realize that this isn't really a formal political movement, that this is, a form of entertainment. And they also realize that they can just say what they want. And people will tune in. If they have a certain level of talent, if they're interesting and intriguing and entertaining, people will tune in. People will disagree with their opinions, but that's what they, they want to hear. They want to hear people offer their fresh and honest opinion. And it's likely, and it does sometimes I don't agree with some of these takes of the anti-Trump people. Like, I'll say this, like Dave Smith went overboard, and he was never really a true Trump supporter, but he went off and he's like, Trump, I apologize for supporting Trump and he needs to be impeached. I think he said he even needs to be arrested. First off, Trump is obviously not going to be impeached from this. Democrats had the most muted, low energy responses to this. A lot of Democrat leaders secretly agree with it, like Chuck Schumer. No one has to wonder why Chuck Schumer's support is in favor of it, but a lot of them secretly agree with it, and they're just like, we don't like how we went about this. They're not going to impeach him over this. We have struck Libya, Syria, ISIS, Yemen under both Biden and Trump without proper authorization from Congress. No one got impeached. There's no repercussions for this. We entrust the president to conduct foreign policy independently of Congress. That's just how it is. And so they're not going to do anything. They're not going to impeach him. It's so dumb. It's we need to impeach him. You're just going to get Massey and AOC to vote for impeachment. It would be under 100 members. Less than half of Democrats would vote for the impeachment for those reasons. And only one Republican in the House and maybe one Republican in the Senate would vote for it. So Congress is all for this. So it's, saying the impeachment, that goes a little bit overboard. And I think it also takes away your level of influence on White House administration officials to say that you're full on anti-Trump. Now, other people, they feel that they get more, if they feel the administration isn't paying attention to them at all, that they might as well go full anti-Trump. And for a lot of those people who are, have made Israel their issue, or that they've become big-time influencers, this is their time to shine. And generally, it's what their audience wants to hear. Their audience, the guys under 30 watching right-wing influencers or right-ish influencers, it's just even the broadcasters who aren't really that political. I'm thinking Theo Vaughn, even Joe Rogan, even though Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan aren't really Zoomers, they're both Gen X, actually. Theo Vaughn is mid-40s, so... but they do have a very young audience, and they have this type of bro audience, and they are not pro-Israel whatsoever. They're very critical of Israel. They're very critical of war, and they're not going to sit around and support this stuff. It's same with Tim Dillon. All those guys are going to go into being, very critical of Trump, very critical of this move, and their audience is going to agree with them. And generally, the audience for the podcast audience is opposed to this move. The online audience is not going to be thrilled with this move. And they're less tied in with supporting Trump no matter what, or the Republican Party no matter what. And that's a big difference between the online right and the offline right. Fox News viewers and talk radio listeners think this is awesome. They love this. Somebody, I think as K-Max asked a question about whether this is a betrayal of the MAGA base. Well, it depends on what you think is the MAGA base. If you think of it as the ordinary people who show up to his rallies and watch Fox News and talk radio, it's absolutely not a betrayal to them. All the polling shows that Trump supporters are more inclined to support this than any other group, even among moderate Republicans. Because even though, if you look at a lot of the influencers and commentators who are supporting this, they're moderate Republicans. Even a lot of never Trumpers like David Frum and Bill Kristol and David French are all supporting the move, and they all absolutely hate Trump. It's the first thing that they've ever liked from Trump. I even saw Julia Yaffe liking this from Trump. This is like she's not even a never Trumper. She's a full-on liberal. So these people are loving this. Those are the moderate Republicans. But even the actual moderate Republicans in the country are more critical of it and skeptical of it than MAGA fans. If you look, and the polling shows that about 70 to 80% of diehard Trump supporters support the bombing. Some of this is due to the fact that they'll support anything Trump does. Other thing is just they kind of, I don't like how this is frequently used and abused, but there is this Jacksonian sentiment of them. And there's this book that's not very good by Walter Russell Mead that outlines the four foreign policy dispositions. And there's Hamiltonian, which is just a cold-hearted or cold-eyed realism about we're securing national interests, and there's not a lot of idealism with it. And then there's Wilsonianism, which is full-on idealism and liberal internationalists. Then there's Jeffersonian, which is also has idealistic, but it's wanting to be non-interventionist and not get involved in war. Then there's Jacksonian, which is populist nationalist. That's like, we're fighting for our honor, and we like to bomb shit of our enemies. And that is still true for a lot of the MAGA base. If they don't like Iran. Somebody asked, I think one of the people asked is do people, offline people, really not like Iran? And yeah, they don't. They don't at all. I mean, it's you have to be extremely online to even have a sympathetic attitude towards Iran. The average Republican MAGA person does not like Iran. Is it on the same level as China? Actually, it's pretty close. They definitely don't like Iran. They don't like Muslims. They see them as Muslim extremists. They can be easily reminded of bad things they've done to America in the past, like the embassy hostage crisis, the Beirut bombings, them helping out Shiite militias blow up American soldiers in Iraq. They can easily be convinced of this. They don't like Iran. They see Iran as a problem. Now, does that mean they want to go to war with Iran? Well, some of them do, but I don't think that's the majority opinion. They don't like Iran. But seeing them B-2s blow up shit in Iran without any consequences, they're just like, this is awesome. Hell yeah, America. And, it's just simply a kind of a knee-jerk patriotism and nationalism. It's like they like to see America boss another country around. They like to see us just absolutely BTFO somebody without any costs. And they like cool bombers and stuff, and they like bombs. So this is just it's a natural reaction for them to think this is cool. So it's not really, but among the online sphere, the online sphere often thinks that this is the true MAGA base, that this is I was seeing tweets saying oh, you just lost 75% of your supporters. It's like he has not lost significant degree. I think this time, unlike in 2017, he is losing a little bit more real life voters. The alt-right in 2017 really was not reflected at all in real world constituencies. It was primarily effective as a few people online who were able to share memes and culture jam that made them effective, but they couldn't count on any real world voters to back up their position. And that was the problem with the alt-right is that they thought they represented the base, and they just represented a few thousand people online. This time, it's a little bit different from the Israeli thing because the broadcasters have a degree of influence, and they played a major role in convincing a lot of young men to go out and vote for Trump. And pretty much everyone under 30 does not like Israel. It does not have a fond opinion of Israel. And they don't like war, and they don't like us doing things on behalf of Israel. And Theo Von has even said multiple times that he feels like Israel completely controls our government and our foreign policy. And when you see us bombing a foreign country and potentially getting into a war for Israel, that affirms their opinion. So those guys are not going to be as enthusiastic about Trump, and they're not going to be convincing their audience to go out and vote for Republicans in the future. Now, whether those guys were actually going to turn out in the midterms, that's a fair assessment that they were probably not going to turn out in the midterms anyway. But still, that's still a significant part of Trump's base. It's what every online influencer likes to salivate over. It's like, we're now winning over the bros. It's all young men are super pro-Trump and they're ready to do this. And that's not even really true. Coming back from the Army parade, I witnessed this conversation between there's some No Kings protesters and these very stereotypical bros. These are the guys that every 45-year-old conservative influencer would go up to like, hey, man, I speak for you. And they're like, who the fuck are you? Those are like these guys that every day on Twitter people worship and pretend that they share their political opinions. And these guys strike up a conversation. They ask him how to sign. And he's like, I totally agree with what you're saying, man. And it's if you don't think things are going wrong in this country and you don't understand what's going on, you're just retarded, man. And I was arguing with some people with MAGA hats on about this. And so these two guys who are very stereotypical bros, they work out, you can clearly, the way they talk, they're always saying bro. They are the ideal voters and constituents for all these conservative influencers and who conservative influencers think that they're representing. These are guys who think that the Trump administration is acting retardedly, is acting stupid. And so they are complaining about that. And they are agreeing with the No Kings protester. Now, on the specific issue of what they're complaining about, I didn't stay around long enough to listen. I assumed it was about Israel. It could have been even worse if they were disagreeing with the ICE raids. But a lot of these guys are not full-on Trump supporters. And whether these guys actually voted in 2024, that's another matter. But this does show that if these guys are probably listening to Theo Vaughn or even going on to some Barstool Sports podcasts and other things, even though Portnoy himself is full-on Israel supporter, that doesn't mean that they're guaranteed locked in Trump supporters. And I think actions like this dissuades them from, wanting to go, continue to support Trump. And so I do think that this time, unlike in 2017, when he was bombing the empty airfields in Syria, that this will actually have real world impact on some of his base. But the vast majority of his base is thinking this is awesome because, standard patriotic attitude. They like America pulling up stuff. And if no Americans die, this is just a win-win in their eyes. So that is the matter there. So we'll go into a little bit of the right-wing divide on this. J. Rhett Rourke asked about the Tucker Cruz interview from last week. Or maybe he... No, he did it. He was behind by something that said, both sides have declared victory with anti-interventionists claiming Cruz didn't know basic facts about the country. He wants the regime change and blah, blah, blah. Tucker was asking frivolous gotcha questions. Do you think the interview to influence anyone's opinion, namely Trump's? Well, actually, the answer to that is clearly not. As he bombed Iran. So actually, that's it. But I guess I'll go off on the topic of the right-wing divide here. To further clarify this, because I was talking about this earlier, of what's happening here, is that the people who are most benefiting from this have been the squishy Trump supporters. It's the DeSantoids, it's even Ted Cruz, who hasn't been that loyal. People were like saying he's been a loyal MAGA guy. Not really. And he's also staking out a position for himself as the most pro-Israel senator, because he's looking to 2028. And he thinks that as possible contenders who are coming from the Trump administration aren't going to be as pro-Israel as him, whether it's J.D. Vance, or most likely J.D. Vance and Rubio. And some guys might contend with that and oh yeah, they're plenty pro-Israel. Maybe not enough for their donors, the donors who really care about this. So Cruz is staking out a position as the most hardcore Israel guy by calling out for regime change and saying, quoting Bible verses for why he must stand loyally by Israel no matter what. And that's what he's trying to stake out here. And that position seems to be having some influence. and they can say like, look, we're fighting back against the non-interventionists, against the Israel haters, and we're winning. And that's why you need to support me in 2028, because you can't really trust this Vance guy. This Vance guy, he was saying that he was, working against the strikes, even though reports are all over the place on Vance's exact role in the bombing strikes. He can point out that. And so he wants to stake out that as his way of differentiating himself from the pack and winning over substantial donors. And it's probably going to work for him in this case. But, further on the divides, it's like, yeah, the people most celebrating this have been the most lukewarm Trump supporters. Whether DeSantoids, Ben Shapiro, I guess Levin has been, even though he's a never Trumper in 2016, he never went full on never Trump, but he was still not eager to support Trump even after the convention. I remember driving back from the convention and we had Levin on just to see what he's saying, and he was really divided over whether he could support Trump. He was criticizing Trump, but then like callers came in and were too critical of Trump. He's like, well, who else are we going to vote for? So he wasn't that eager of a Trump supporter, but when he became president, he was relatively loyal to Trump. I mean, more so than Shapiro, than a lot of these other guys. But those are the guys most eager for the intervention, and it's more the people who've been with Trump since 2016. Tucker and Bannon were some of the few conservatives to back him in 2016. Prominent conservatives, and they aren't being listened to. And also, Charlie Kirk has been insanely pro-Trump for years and years, and he chose not to listen to them. He chose to listen to people like Cruz. So, in that matter. But yeah, and even the way that there's also an interesting case of how they're trying to position this. Because none of them can actually go, well, except for Lindsey Graham, and I guess Ted Cruz, have gone full 2003 Iraq war talking points like, we have to strike them over there so they don't hit us here. But they will then hit us here if we strike them, which means we need to bomb them more, which doesn't make any sense. And there's those types, but then everyone else has to accommodate the new paradigm. No one wants to be full on neocon, so except for Lindsey Graham and some others. So the rest have to present their position this way, and there's a couple different positions that people have been making. One is that we're just bombing them. This is not a regime change. That seems to be the consensus now for the majority of Trump supporters. Even though Trump himself is not being committed to this position by his tweet of like his MAGA tweet, but make Iran great again. But the rest of the administration, when they came out, they're like, this is not about regime change. This is just about bombing. It's like, okay, but the point is to destabilize regime to potentially achieve regime change. We'll see if that happens, but that's, that was part of the equation. So that's now like everyone's position is like opposed to regime change and opposed to boots on the ground, and we're just going to do the airstrikes. Okay, we'll see how that works out. So there's that one position. Then there's a full-on regime change people like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham who want us to do more, and even increasingly Israel, even though we did this on Israel's behalf, once we give them an inch, they'll try to take a mile. They're now saying, we're going to need a continuous bombing campaign of a year to eliminate the program. It's like, this is why you shouldn't have done it in the first place, because they're not satisfied with us doing this, and they're going to demand more, and they're already trying to demand more, and that's stupid. So there's that position, because they want to achieve, the real goal is to achieve regime change, and they think that if they do a continuous bombing campaign, that will get its results. We'll see if that is. And then there are the more non-interventionist takes, where some people are just like, well, we'll just leave this to Israel. Israel can solve this, but we need to stay out of it. Well, that's no longer... we already involved ourselves, so that's no longer clear. Or there's the people who are like, we need to rein in Israel to make sure that they're not doing this anymore. I don't know how that's going to work, especially since we're cheering on this bombing campaign and other things. So it's really up to Iran to achieve peace. And this goes in my take of why they're not going to strike back to retaliate. Iran, one is the weakness of Iran. Iran is extremely weak. It's also worried about getting toppled. As I said earlier, every government wants to preserve itself in power. It does not want to do things that's going to remove itself from power. And if they unleash sleeper cells to commit terror attacks against civilians, their two remaining allies that they depend on, Russia and China, are not going to back that. They're not going to back a terror campaign against civilians. They're also not going to back a campaign on blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which might hurt China more than any other country. Yeah, China is not going to be down for that. So they're going to be furious if Iran does this. So they're not going to back this. So, and they are very dependent on China and Russia right now. And all they can do is have these passive aggressive remarks about like, Russia, if you don't back us, we're going to remember this. And it's like, what are you going to do? You don't have any other allies. So their two remaining most important allies are not going to be this. They also can't rely on their proxies as much besides the Houthis, but the Houthis already made a deal with us. Houthis could renege on that deal, but they'll see what the Houthis can do. Hezbollah is extremely weak right now. I mean, Israel took out most of its leadership last year. Assad's gone, so they don't have Assad anymore. Hamas is preoccupied. Russia's preoccupied with Ukraine. They don't want to involve themselves, and they're not going to support any retaliatory measures or extreme measures. I mean, the only thing Russia says is that they might, they did have a troll tweet from Medvedev saying that they'll help them with their nuclear program. I don't think that probably is the case. It's more just trolling. But we'll see. They're not going to support these retaliatory measures. The most thing is that they're just going to be more committed to building their nuclear program because they see, the difference between them and Russia, between themselves and Russia, where Russia has nukes, West doesn't bomb them. Iran doesn't have nukes, we bomb them. It's very made clear. It's like why you need a nuclear program. If you have a nuclear program, other countries respect you enough to not bomb your capital city and these important military facilities. It's the importance of nukes are demonstrated by this. So they're just going to the most retaliatory measure they're going to do is they're going to just stick to their nuclear program. Whether that's going to mean a deal or not, we're going to see. I mean, they try to make a deal beforehand. And pretty much all the reports, and this isn't just from America, this is also European diplomats. European diplomats are trying to work through this, and they're like, Iran had, basics for any negotiation. They was like, we're not going to negotiate while we're being bombed. That's a pretty rational explanation, but, Israel's going to keep bombing them, and Trump wasn't willing to hear that out. We'll see if they take a different tune on negotiations. But, I mean, they keep making these threats. The one thing is also that they're not going to do extreme retaliation is that they keep making these over-the-top threats. It's like, this is going to be a night to be remembered for centuries. And then we forget about it literally a few hours later. And they even promised, like, a, whole hellstorm last night. And that didn't happen. I mean, maybe something will happen today. But I don't think so. So they did do a sleeper cell attack. That would create enough public support for a more extensive military campaign against Iran to achieve regime change. And the Iranians don't want to do that. Or I don't think they want to do that. So I am putting in all my chips on Iran doesn't do anything more than they're already doing, which is launching missiles at Israel and continuing to build up a nuclear program any way they can. So they're less likely to, the real retaliatory measures, they're even more committed to their nuclear program than ever before. So that is my thoughts on that. So a lot of thoughts on the measure. I guess I'll conclude with like how to approach with Trump and the right. Is one thing is like, it is a very unpopular position to stay pro-Trump and anti-bombing. It's like people just need to think that you need to be either or. The issue with the right in terms of real world politics is our fortunes are tied with Trump, whether we like it or not, in terms of having real world political impact. Because if you take away Trump, if Trump fully discredits himself, the GOP is going to be taken over by Paul Ryan types again. And thus, we no longer have any real world political influence. We're back to 2014. I mean, we're going to have probably bigger audiences, online audiences, but I mean, if you're just providing entertainment and you're having no real world effect, then what's the purpose of that? So, the political fortunes are tied with Trump, and you want Trump to do the right thing, and hopefully he listens to right advice so he doesn't destroy Trumpism, and we still are capable of having real world political influence. And so the political fortunes are tied with Trump, whether we like it or not. And so if Trump fails, it's very hard to say, oh, well, this proves we need a more right wing alternative to him. I don't know what right wing alternative to that is. People want like Massey. Massey's like domestic policy sucks. Okay, I mean he's like has good foreign policy positions, but his domestic policy is lame, and he's also doesn't have any. He doesn't have a necessary charisma. He's like very much a nerd with a chip on his shoulder. That's not going to rally people behind him. He's not going to get. He's not going to be a serious presidential contender. I think he can. He has a chance of beating a Trump opponent, back opponent in his primary. I mean, he's done it before, or he's done it against the establishment backing primary opponents against him. So that's likely. But in terms of him being a national political figure, he doesn't have it in him. And even his domestic policy isn't that great. He's not that great on immigration. You can like him on foreign policy. That doesn't mean you need to think he's awesome on everything else. So there's not that. There's not that real figure emerging. There's all those people who thought like DeSantis was it, and all these DeSantoids are saying DeSantis is the real non-interventionist are now cheering on the Iran strikes and wanting regime change. So that turned out to be bullshit. So it's really just Trump. And if it's not Trump and that is whole discredited, you then have people like Ted Cruz emerging. Or, Youngkin isn't that bad, but Youngkin is more Paul Ryan-ish than a lot of others. And Ted Cruz just sucks. So you have those people like emerge if Trumpism is fully discredited. And so our political fortunes are tied with Trump, whether we like it or not. Now, if you feel that you just want to be honest as an influencer and share your honest opinion, and you've decided that you no longer like Trump, I mean, that's to your own. As I said, we're not really formally tied with a party. Even our relationship with the Republican Party is murkier and less direct than it was with the conservative movement and the Republican Party. That's that. And some people become bigger and have a degree of influence over that young male population by declaring independence for Trump. But in terms of like the whole, online right, if the online right turns all against Trump, then everyone can ignore them. I think that they would have even less influence because it's very hard to turn the type of online sphere into a real world political movement. I mean, the alt-right learned that in 2017. I mean, of course, right now there's far more people into the online right than in 2017, but a lot of the influence comes from being a part of the big tent MAGA movement. Now, does that mean you have to support everything Trump does? No. You can be critical of Trump. You can criticize him when he does wrong things. I try to do that if he says something stupid on immigration, or if he, mishandles how he does the tariffs, and even with the Iran strikes. I'm not a fan of this. I think it's a stupid move, and it's not done for the American national interest. It's done for Israel's national interest. And as Nixon explained in that famous clip that went around, America's interests are not the same as Israel's interests. I think that should be clear to everyone. But at the same time, if we're wanting to have real world political effects, it depends on Trumpism's success. And that's why you want Trump to do the right things that does not discredit Trumpism but it also discredits Trumpism among young men. And so you want him to do the right thing. You hope he chooses the right thing. And if he does the wrong thing and he discredits Trumpism, it is not like a moment to celebrate. Even though I don't think most people are celebrating, it's very bad for us. So you want him to succeed. And I do not want war to break out or full scale war. I mean, bombing another country, that counts as war, a lot of things. But I think for the American public, we think war is, having boots on the ground and having a high degree of American casualties, which we're not seeing, and I don't think is going to happen here. And I think that's more due to the Iranians than to anyone else. So those are my thoughts on that. There's a few specific questions. I covered pretty much most of them. J. Brett Rourke sent 3 questions today. He's gonna have to submit the other one for the mailbag, even though it's a short one. But we'll see what we get to. I'm trying to think if he had a. No, I answered answered that. I think it's looking around for. No, Nitro's. I'll answer Nitro's questions the next. I think it's. Yeah, Gillis Enjoyer had this take. I'm going to go off on some specific questions. If you feel that I did not answer your question fully, you can submit it for the mailbag. But I pretty much fully answered some of them. But there's a few that I know that they go into other specific territory that I need to go to. So Gillis Enjoyer asked, I've been seeing on Twitter the airstrikes were done in part to get the neocons in the Senate like Graham and Cotton to vote for all the immigration provisions in the big, beautiful bill. Do you think this is accurate? No, it's not accurate at all. And he says, and in a general hypothetical, would you be okay with a more aggressive foreign policy if we simultaneously got a hardline immigration policy? No, because if we have a more aggressive foreign policy, we're causing more migrant waves, and that's going to go to Europe, and then we're going to have the problem with there. And it also undermines hardline immigration policy if they're like, oh no, the poor refugees, and the media is blasting these images of dead kids elsewhere or whatever. It undermines public support for it. And it also creates problems for Europe. And I know that there's a lot. I forgot to get into this, but nobody asked real questions about it. I had the dumbest responses to my more regime change means more refugees. This has been abundantly clear anytime we do this stuff. It's happened in Iraq, happened in Afghanistan, happened in Libya, happened in Syria. It will happen in Iran. It just happens. Especially when war is out. But all these people are like, no, it doesn't. Fortress Europe will shoot any migrant that comes across. Like, what world do you live in? Europe can barely keep out the migrants they have. They've been having a lower flow of it. They have improved border security since 2015, but they still get a lot more illegal migrants than they did pre-2015. Pre-2015, they were getting usually under 100,000. Since then, they've always gotten more than 200,000. And last year, even though it marked a decline from previous years, they were still getting nearly 300,000 illegal immigrants. Also, when those illegal immigrants get there, they can't deport them. It's unlike America. Like France, it's been estimated that under 10% of migrants issue deportation orders. Mind you, this is just the migrants with deportation orders get deported. And that's the same in Germany. It's even the same in the UK. And they can't even deport like child rapists and murderers. There's all these murderers and rapists and other hardened criminals that say, oh, it's against my human rights to deport me. And they're like, oh, the courts say, oh, that's so true. We can't deport you. They have both their national courts and European courts that are overruling these people. They're having trouble sending migrants to Albania. It's a problem. I mean, we would like Europe to improve, but having a huge migrant wave hit them is bad. So that's what aggressive foreign policy, it undermines support for a hardline immigration policy. So that's not a trade-off. And it's also the same with like Cotton and Graham. Like those aren't the people like demanding, I mean, maybe Graham is, but those aren't the real opponents to the big, beautiful bill. It's mostly coming from Rand Paul and Ron Johnson and the libertarian types. Cotton is like good on immigration. Cotton is like wanting more stuff on immigration. Like Cotton was a co-sponsor of the RAISE Act. He didn't have to be. There's no trade-off to get the votes from Lindsey Graham and these guys to vote for the immigration provisions in the big, beautiful bill. The people that he's been having to deal with primarily in the Senate are the libertarianish types, not the Graham and Cotton types. So no, there is no trade-off there. He's got another question I'll go back to. I think Pay-Per-View had a question about the Shah's Iran, and he says, I'll answer. I answered a second question about the deterrent factor of the nukes. Yeah, it is truly a deterrent factor with getting nukes, as Russia shows. as we know not to directly attack Russia. Ukraine hasn't learned that lesson, but or to escalate things. But they're in a war with Russia, so I guess they got nothing to lose. But no, nukes do deter. That's the second question. But his other question was, hypothetically, if between 1945 and 1953, when communism was its highest threat to the Shah's Iran, the Shah was toppled and Iran became a Soviet satellite country, how much different would Middle East politics be, assuming it would follow the same timeline as other Soviet bloc countries? Would Iran resemble that of Kazakhstan and the countries of the Caucasus region, or would it possibly balkanize with their Kurds and Azeris? If you could also do an IQ supplement on the Shah and his fall to the Ayatollah. Maybe do something on the Shah and the Ayatollah. That's like a big topic. I'm reading a book about the Ayatollah right now, but I mean that's like I'd have to see how long I could do a podcast on that. But on the matter of Soviet satellite, well, the entire Middle East would have been a Soviet satellite if that happened, because they had good ties with Syria, they had good ties with Egypt. I mean, there would have been the Gulf states there. I guess they would have been close with us, but most of the Middle East would have been Soviet. I don't know what it would have been like. And Iraq was also having communist problems, so they could have been fully communist. It would have been like a Muslim Warsaw Pact. So our only allies would have been like Turkey. Well, would have been Israel, I guess, because they would have not been controlled by the communists, and the fact that all these communist satellites were attacking them that's really what, initially Israel had good relations with Soviets, but then these Soviet aligned countries were attacking them. Then they moved more to our sphere. But how they would have ended up, I couldn't tell you. It's more that it would have been bad for U.S. foreign policy for the Soviets to control that. Also with controlling all that oil. I mean, it would have been a major blow to our economy. We became more dependent on Iran in the 60s for their oil supply, where initially we were giving them a lot of aid, but then our aid ended because we were buying so much of their oil. They didn't need the aid anymore. They were getting rich off the oil. But say if they controlled Iran and Iraq, that would have been horrible for our economy. And it would have been horrible for this communists would have controlled a significant degree of the oil supply, which would have been a serious advantage to them. So that would have not been good for us. But that's why we were, even though Mossadegh was, he made some entries to the Soviets and thinking he would, the United States would back him. But the fact that we found him to be unreliable and possibly somebody would take the Iranians over to the Soviet sphere, that's why we toppled him. And I think it's actually getting rid of Mossadegh was fine. Because the regime change, it wasn't like there was already a leader there. We just fully supported the Shah to ensure that he stayed in power. And, there wasn't, a massive civil war or refugee crisis from that. They just toppled one guy. It was a successful regime change. It's even similar with regime change can be fine if we have a clear alternative who can quickly unify the country and ensure that it doesn't descend into civil war and to, mass refugee exodus. And we saw that a lot with Latin America. We had the subgeneral to take over, like Pinochet or something. They'd kill or they take care of just the, their political, the rival political government, and there would be that. There would not be that many blowback from it. But toppling Mossadegh was fine. It was in our interest. We couldn't have allowed them to go into the Soviet sphere. That would be my take. Yeah, I'll probably do an IQ supplement on the Shah at some point. I could do one on the Ayatollah maybe this week, but I'm probably not going to do it. There's so much to discuss with the Ayatollah and the Iranian regime that I'd have to even read a bit more on that. But we'll see. Maybe I might change my mind. So that's his opinion. I think Sharecrop had one. He asked about the terrorist attacks. I don't think that's going to happen, so that answer that. And I also asked, do most people offline hate Iran? I said yes, the MAGA people do. And so I answered that. So he said, related question, do you think the free Palestine stuff will be toned down or amplified? Absolutely amplified, because if you're Democrats feel that if you watch the clip of Bernie Sanders speaking when the strike happened, they were like, no more wars, no more wars. And now that's going to, and if they think Israel's getting us into a war, guess who they're going to have more sympathetic attitude towards? Free Palestine. So that's going to be amplified by the attacks. It's definitely not going to be toned down. There's going to be even greater sympathy for it among Democrats than there was before. And even among some Republicans. But not a lot of Republicans, as shown by the polling on the matter. But yeah, it's going to be amplified. If they now think that America is acting on the behest of Israel in the Middle East, that's going to encourage these guys to protest even more. So that is my question to that. I'll answer this one from J. Rhett Rourke. It's specific. Are we now entering a danger zone where Trump, influenced by watching Fox News all day, now believes that the loser wars he previously opposed were only loser wars because he wasn't the one in charge? Make Iran great again. He's instinctually doesn't like to get full on war. The reason why he did this is because he was convinced by the generals that he needed to. That this wouldn't have any consequences. And so far, he's right. But we'll see how long that takes. And there was no cost and consequences. He also wanted to share in Israel's apparent glory where they're bombing Iran without any consequences and they're getting away with it. And he's like, oh, I want America to do this too. He's still going to say like Iraq and all the other wars are bad. But he wants to look like a boss. He wants to look like he's a badass and in charge and doing things that he feels that his audience wants. And Fox News has been telling him all day that this is a smart idea. Whether he's going to go, I don't think this is a sign he's going to go full neocon, but it is what it is. The other thing I didn't get to mention is the terrible like cheerleading that's gone on of the attacks. Like with people, like they saw the one general with like being locked in, like doing like all like a devil horns like thing on the table. They're like, he's locked in, and then they have this general like, this general definitely didn't read White Fragility. He's a badass, and it's like, and thank you Pete Hegseth for doing this, and all this like lame ass shit. Dude, you don't have to tweet this shit. And it's so bad that the way that it sells the war, even though it's being done for Israel, you have to get these like Chad Gentiles like Hegseth and Kurilla and the Joint Chief of Staff Chairman. I think Kane is his name. Hold on, I need to check on that. I should know the Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman. Yeah, Dan Kane. That's actually not very good. It's like being informed. But General Dan Kane, who is like, everyone's like, this guy is awesome. We need more generals like this. Dude, it's like so lame. But this is like what the Fox News boomer thing is. But if in case you feel like you need to tweet this stuff, you don't. You don't. They already have Fox News for that. They don't need your help. So that is my take for that. Answered both of Arm Day enjoyers with that and K-Maxes. So if you guys feel I didn't, you guys can send it in the mailbag. I'll go with Bealist Enjoyer's second question. He says, Scott, why is it that you think that so many right-wingers online fall into third worldism these days? Is it pure contrarianism or a deeper rooted resentment against mainstream society that they can't fit into, driven by Nietzsche's slave morality? For the longest time, I rejected horseshoe theory because I firmly believe the far left and right had nothing in common, but now I think there may be something to it with the number of supposed right-wingers you see online simping for countries that hate America, the West, and by extension, white people. Well, I don't know if third worldism is the correct take. I mean, some of it is like full on. I mean, if they're like celebrating North Korea, Venezuela, Iran, well... Venezuela has always been the worst. It's like, dude, this regime sucks. It's also just, it's like incredibly poor. Like, there's nothing cool about Maduro. Like, Venezuela is like one of the worst. North Korea is another problem. Like, no one wants to live there. It's like a complete slave state. There, it is the full-on ant colony. You don't want to live in the ant colony. But they're all about that. Iran, I also don't think it's like you don't want to live in a country ruled by semi-literate clerics that you know have all these ridiculous ideas, and and people, a lot of these guys are like hyper individualistic. They would not survive an Iranian regime where they have like morality police coming around and hitting them on the, smacking them around and stuff. So I don't think people would really like that. But why is it? Some of it's contrarianism. Some of it is that if you have like dissident right wing views, you are dissenting from mainstream America. I have an article that's coming out on this probably this week. I've been meaning to publish it for a while, but there's other articles that have been coming. Other news topics have gotten in the way. So hopefully we publish it this week. Should be out Thursday, I think, barring any other news developments. But a lot of the people in this here are dissenting Americans. They don't like mainstream America. They don't like how everyone's smoking weed. They don't like the consumerism. They don't like the sports betting. They don't like all the tattoos or many other things. And so they feel detached and alienated from mainstream American society. And then there's the factor of the grass is greener on the other side, is that, these guys also claim that they're against degenerate American society, so they must be base and must be cool. And so they feel that the way to achieve their political goals is to side with America's enemies, which doesn't really matter in the fact. I mean, China does not care about being based or white people or anything like that. And so they only care about their own power. So, it comes to the fact is that it's a result of alienation from American society, and they find that grass is greener on the other side, and that the opponents of America seem to be better and more based and more trad, and so they start to sympathize with them. I don't know if it'd be fully slave morality. Some people are more resented by resentment for others. I would use alienation from mainstream American society. Some of it's legitimate. I think most of the guys, if you have these political opinions, you're not going to be that fond of what America looks like today. So that's understandable. But then that alienation goes into feeling that, our opponents are much better than us, which is usually not the case. And so, that's my answer to that. Ken had a similar question. He said, why do libtards hate America? Explanation, why are they so fixated on the sins of the founding fathers and the genocide of the Native Americans and slavery? What is it that drives their compulsion to deconstruct and demonize American identity? Well, it depends on what type of libtard. I mean, the type of center left people who were around Hillary Clinton and Biden, well, maybe not so much Biden, but the type of people who are like, the woke has gone too far. Those people don't hate America. They think that what America is libtardism. And so that's a high number of libtards, like the Aaron Sorkin types and those people. They think that what truly is America is libtardism. Now there's the 1619 Project people who think that it's all, and the Howard Zinn types who think that it's all this bad stuff. And I think it's an obvious resentment towards the white people found in this country. And they don't like the fact that when they look at the history of America, instead of seeing libtards winning all the time, like John Meacham and those guys, they instead see white supremacists winning. And they see people who don't look like them winning. And having their enemy win and that being reflected in American history is not their thing. And anti-whiteness is a core part of the left now. And as a country that was led and founded by and primarily shaped by white people, they're not going to have that much of a fondness for American identity. And that's why they don't like the flag or anything else. They see this as symbols of whiteness and white supremacy. So that would be, that's why they fixate on these things, because they want to demonize whites. But even the goal of 1619 Project is to transform America into, rather than just libtards as the heroes, as non-whites as the heroes. But it still creates this conflicting attitude towards America when whites were always at the center of our history. So there's that. New England Refugee had a few questions. Oh, he had one about Iran, which that I should have gotten to, but it's a related question. He said, how will the Israeli-American-Iran war affect Ukraine? Russia seems to benefit by having less aid given to Ukraine and oil prices going up, helping their economy. It appears to be helping them. in a way, because one, no one's paying attention to Russia and what they're doing, and we're deploying all our military resources to the Middle East, so they know that we're not going to intervene. So they're escalating their attacks on Ukraine. Oil prices help them give a boost to their economy, and there's less attention paid to them. But at the end of the day, it also isn't the best, because Russia at the same time sees that they can't trust America as a negotiating partner. Because the whole time with Iran, we've been using deception. It's like, oh, we used the negotiations as a ruse, or oh, we said we weren't strike as a ruse. And it's like, why would anyone trust our word? And so with Russia, they're less inclined to trust the word. I mean, but they weren't coming to the negotiating table either, because Putin wants to have sizable enough gains to say he won, and without those sizable enough gains of territory, he's not going to agree to a deal, because right now he's not going to be getting much land agreed to in a ceasefire, whatever type of deal they make. So he's trying to use this opportunity to go after Ukraine and think that they're going to be getting, and there's potentially less aid going to Ukraine, and far less of a chance of America intervening if we're all focused on the Middle East, and there's less media attention paid to it if everyone's focused on Iran. So it probably does help Russia's war effort, but it also sends a message to Putin that maybe he shouldn't even negotiate with us in the first place. So I think the possibility of a peace deal in Ukraine is diminished for this year due to the American strikes on Iran. His second question is, 0 catches and releases on the border in May. This monumental achievement makes me think of Senator Langford in Oklahoma sponsoring that horrible bill last year made to bail out Biden. Please go off on him if you have. And what are the prospects of primarying him? I haven't been paying attention. We have other things. People always ask me to go off on people after, I've been talking about a lot of other things. But Langford sucks. He obviously sucks. He is at risk of a primary. I know that it's like with Tillis and Cornyn, they've all had risk of primary. I don't know how much of a primary risk Langford is. I think Langford. First off, Langford isn't up for election until 2028. So, so no, he's not at worries now. I had to double check that because I know there's a couple of Republicans. No, it's the Bill Cassidy. I got him confused. Bill Cassidy voted for Trump's impeachment, has a primary threat. Tom Tillis has a primary threat. How serious those are is unclear. Cornyn has the most serious one because Bill Paxton is leading in every poll. So the prospects of primarying him are diminished unless he decides to go full on anti-Trump, and Trump is like a final revenge and his final term just decides to go after him. But I probably he does have to have a popular enough Republican to go after him. The reason why Cornyn has a serious primary threat is because Paxton is a popular Republican figure in Texas. If there's not a really popular guy to go up against him and that guy isn't getting the full support of Trump, it makes it harder. So I don't know, but you have to wait till 2028 to primary him, and a lot can change in 3 years. So there it is. He sucks. He's one of the worst. He's one of the worst Republicans. I remember in his first term, he was trying to oppose Trump restricting refugees and other things. He is one of the worst Republicans in the Senate. I'd probably say, well, the worst are the moderates like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, but those are a given. So you want to take the rest of the party. They're kind of like their own thing. Susan Collins isn't that bad. It's more Murkowski. Murkowski is the worst. Susan Collins, for what she is, she's fine. I would not say she's one of the worst. Murkowski would be the worst. But then the ones who are supposedly conservatives, it'd probably be Tillis, number 2, Langford, 3. I would have said maybe Cornyn worse, but Cornyn is so desperate to win his primary that he's slightly improved. You could also it'd be a battle between Cornyn and Graham. So I would say those are some of the worst Republicans that there are. Tillis is worse than Langford. I would say Tillis is number two, and then Langford, Cornyn, and Graham are probably all tied for third worst. I actually no, I would say Langford's worst. I would put Graham as fifth, to be honest. So that would be my take on Langford. I know you guys all want me to go off, but I've had so much energy spent on Iran and other matters that there's limited time to have go off moments. So we'll conclude with LK Rurik. If I did not get or let me make sure the pay-per-view. Yeah, I got that. I got all the pretty much everyone else's questions and covered it in the first. Actually, Nitro's got another question. This is actually important. I needed to go after this. So I'll go to Nitro and then we'll go to LK Rourke. He says, can you weigh in on the federal land sale controversy? I'm not opposed to in theory, but Mike Lee's stated objective of affordable housing reeks of BS. The interior of the country is chock full of affordable housing that no one wants to live in. People want to live in around cities where there are good jobs and amenities. The proposal may originate from the LDS wanting to buy a bunch of BLM land, not Black Lives Matter land, but Bureau of Land Management land in Utah, hence it being Mike Lee's baby. That wouldn't even be a big deal in my opinion, but the dishonest advertising has made the entire proposal toxic. Yeah, the affordable housing thing is bullshit because it's all in the relatively unpopulated West. It might help California suburbs and Oregon and suburbs and suburbs around Seattle, but there's so many regulations in those blue states that it might not even make that big of a deal. And there's going to be so much opposition in those states because they're all very lefting. I mean, it's like a good thing to be conservationist, but there's going to be a lot of hostility towards it. Elsewhere, it's like, why does Montana need affordable housing? Like, these are not the places that are at risk. I know that there's been some rising costs to rural areas, but relative to the rest of the country, what the real problem is like they want affordable housing near a metro area where people live and work. And that's not in Montana. And so that's like a dumb argument for it. So that argument doesn't even make sense. I think it is something that it's more these groups and corporate interests that are wanting to buy up this land. And they can't say that like it's corporate interests buying up the land to use for their own use. And so they just say, oh, it's about affordable housing. That's not going to work. Now, there is an argument for that because you could say like, look, we have this massive deficit. We're not cutting entitlements. We're not cutting the defense budget. How are we going to make up for this? Maybe we sell off some land. Now, how much revenue would that generate? Is that enough to offset the deficit? Probably not, but they could get some more revenue inflowing from it. Now, whether that is worth selling off that land, it is. It's not selling off all the land. It's only selling off like less than they'd probably always sell off like less than a percentage of the land that is there. But it's a hard sell to say we're selling off public lands to corporations for their own use. And what are they going to do with that? Like, that's not a popular mean. So they have to say it's about building affordable housing. But it's like, oh, wow, we built a bunch of affordable housing in the middle of nowhere. Like, who's going to be there? Actually, the people who would move there are Guatemalans and Indians. They would somehow find a way to move there. Because that's where all the affordable housing, they would find a way to move into those cheap apartment complexes in the middle of nowhere, Montana, and do something there. And that's not really what we want. So yeah, I think the reasoning's stupid. I'd probably say I oppose it. I understand the generating revenue, but I'm skeptical that it would generate enough revenue to offset to make a serious dent in the deficit. And it's not going to solve the affordable housing crisis. It could even lead to the fact that we now have, we had this pristine land once in one place, and now that's chock full of Indians and Mexicans. So, yeah, I would say I would oppose it. I'm not that as interested in it. I mean, there's so many things going on right now that have more of my interest. I do find it a little weird that right-wing Twitter has decided this is the most important issue. Kind of because it's an easy win, or it's an easy thing to just feel like morally superior on. Which I understand. I dispositionally, I would support protecting the public land. But the level of interest for it, with with Iran, immigration, and all the things going on, maybe a little bit disproportionate share of attention. So that's my thoughts on that. And we'll conclude on with L.K. Rurik. And he said, I've linked a Twitter post of a new political ad by Eric Swalwell. In case it's deleted by the time you're reading this, the ad has a white guy with his unrealistically white Latinx girlfriend when they're ambushed by ICE agents. The male pleads that she's a citizen, but a Republican caricature says she's being deported anyway and heavily implies she'll be raped in a Salvadoran prison. What were they thinking? No, those ads have been around. Like, you always use that same Republican actor, and they're always like highly sexual and like weird things about it. It's designed to get attention. They're not going to be running this ad on normal TV networks because people would just find it weird as shit, and they're not going to go along with this stuff. It doesn't convince people. It's just done to generate attention on social media, which it achieved. And there are a lot of Democratic ads that are doing this, that they can bamboozle donors and say, like, look at all the attention we got. But it's not convincing these people. They use that same Republican actor for everything. And there was like the one ad where the guy was like about to jerk off to some porn. And then this guy comes in and is like, we're banning that. That's obviously not going to give it to anyone because it's like a gross ad, but it's designed to create social media attention and drive outrage, and then people are talking about this ad. But is it actually convincing people? No. And it's the same here. It's just about the attention economy, not the persuasion economy. But it's a funny ad. Do admire the libs for their creativity there. But that is it for Highly Respected today. If you feel that I did not get to your question, or if I did not get to your question, you can submit it for the mailbag where we directly answer the questions that are submitted. But I covered most of the territory, so I think you guys should be good on that. But we're going to have a great content week. Next week is July 4th, so we're going to be having a little bit different schedule. We will not have the normal podcast Monday. It'll be written. We'll just have me answering questions, and that will serve what's posted on Monday. And we're only going to have one column. It might be a book recommendation list. American history, I've been meaning to post that for a while, but we'll see what news events there are. I might write a column depending on what other things are. But we're only going to have one column next week. And then we're going to have mailbags, written answers, not a podcast. And then we'll have an IQ supplement. And then July 4th, the day off. So you guys can enjoy our birthday that day. So that's going to be the schedule for next week. So that is it for Highly Respected today. Stay tuned for more great content. So until next time, stay respected.